Everyone has.
According to Gretchen.
I'm sure they.
And my kids and lots of other people.
I was just trying to point. It's part of the obvious.
Man, how long do you want me to
What?
spend on?
No, he hasn't shown up. I don't know what's going on.
30 minutes.
Sure, and then open it to questions. Okay, all right, let me know when you want to get
My
started.
goal is to be out of here by 10:30.
Well, yeah, not gonna get
Yeah,
that's Friday, catch my first flight, we'll see if I can.
And if we need to be singers, that's fine.
Okay.
I have no, I know
None of us are gonna argue.
argue.
My client's gonna get there at 10:15 and wait on me because she's coming from Rockport.
Okay, well, we can speed up.
And it's fine, it's fine. I canceled my first one. Coming tomorrow.
Yeah, it's been an hour and a half.
Come here.
Last night, your.
Our meeting the other night, we worked for 3 hours.
No, that was not a
Last
problem
night,
coming out.
It
It is right now.
It's only 2 years old. You're gonna get a new one.
Well, I'm 17, I'm trying to.
Okay, well.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not bad.
You want me to do that? Okay.
You're a good hour. I mean, 45 minutes an hour. You just start traffic.
What's Haley doing this summer? Oh, that's right. Liz was telling me that. How's that going? She loves it. Where is she though? Is she here? Or is she? Yeah. Right. So she's having a good time.
You know.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order, you guys. Okay, it's 9:30 according to our trusty clock up there. Joint City Council and Hotel Motel Occupancy Tax Advisory Committee special meeting Thursday, June 29th, 2023. We'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to jointly call together the City Council and our new Hotel Motel Occupancy Tax Advisory Committee. So welcome. This is your first official duty. I'm impressed everybody is here. That's wonderful. I'm super excited to see what we do as a group and you guys can do for us. So we'll start with item 3, which is citizen comments and reports. Fran, I don't have any, are there?
There are none.
Okay, hearing none. We'll go on to item 4, which is item for consideration. And A is a presentation and discussion by our guest, Scott Joslove, President and CEO of the Texas Hotel Lodging Association. Scott?
Well, it's an honor to be here with everyone. I will tell you, I wrote an article back in 1989 called "What Cities Need to Know to Administer the Local Hotel Tax." And that'll be a parting gift that I will email to all of you. And it talks about what the 2-part test is for expenditure of local hotel tax. Now, when you think of a city, they have a number of revenues. The city has property tax. They have the general city sales tax. Those are general revenues, and the standard under state law. I know I'm sitting in the city attorney's spot, but I'll give what the city attorney would probably say is you can spend your general city property tax on any public purpose. Same thing for your general city sales tax, any public purpose. It could be tourism, it could be roads and streets, law enforcement, any public purpose. But there are certain taxes, like if we were to do a crime control district, what do you think you could spend that money on? Crime control. You couldn't spend it on general roads or general public health care, things like that, even though it may be a beautiful program. Well, the hotel tax is like that. It's a dedicated tax. And you can only spend the money from the hotel tax if it fits into a statutory category under chapter 351. So the first thing is you need to figure out, is there a category that it fits under? And then the second test, there's two thresholds. Then the second threshold is you need to show that every expenditure must directly promote tourism and the hotel and convention industry. Now, you might say, why is it that this public tax dollar has to directly promote a private industry, the convention and hotel industry? And the reality is, back when they were first proposing the hotel tax, it applied, believe it or not, to attractions, it applied to restaurants, and it applied to hotels. And then in the negotiations at the legislature, attractions got out, restaurants got out, and the only ones that were left were hotels. And hotels agreed to it. And they said, we're good with it as long as every expenditure will have some sort of effect on hotel activity and convention activity. If you're gonna single us out to have a higher tax, you have the traditional sales tax at a cumulative 8.25%. But you have a hotel tax that can be as high as 17%. If we're gonna have that high in exaction against our guests, at least make it for purposes that'll have a direct benefit on our business. So that standard exists to this day. Every expenditure, that means all of them, must, it's mandatory, directly promote. Now, I studied state laws regularly and used to be chief of municipal affairs for the attorney general. And it's very rare, I can tell you, for a law to require you to directly do something. Because if you think about it, everything that you make it to make a city nicer indirectly promotes tourism, right? You put better park benches out, you do some landscaping, that indirectly promotes it. But to require a direct promotion means it really had, but for those improvements, we wouldn't have the additional hotel and convention activity. So it must directly promote tourism, bring in people from another city or another county to Port Aransas. It must directly promote tourism and the hotel and convention industry. Now, if it just said you need to directly promote tourism, it'd be enough that people came for a day trip. But because you needed to directly promote tourism and the hotel and convention industry, it means you need to both bring them from another city or another county and have an impact on hotel activity and convention convention activity. Now, there's a number of ways you can have an impact on hotel activity. Not everybody is going to say there's an event here, that's why I'm coming to the hotel. Sometimes they'll already be here. And it's one of the things that they do. I may not have come for the boat museum. But if it's one of the things I do while I'm here, then you could argue that that directly promotes hotel activity because it elongates your stay. It's one of the things that keeps you here maybe 2 days instead of one, things like that. We give the line that, we can, many of our guests can barely close their suitcase and keep all the towels in there, from our rooms. And it's people aren't coming just because of the hotels or just because of one thing. There's often a number of things, and you need to figure out which are the assets in your community that are being frequented by lodging guests, whether it's short-term rental, traditional hotel, or any other sort of lodging where they're paying hotel tax. If they're frequented, then arguably they're an attraction and they're part of your ecosystem for tourism. So, all right, every expenditure must directly promote tourism, bringing them from another city, another county, and the hotel and convention industry. That's the standard for all expenditures. Then you have some general parameters. You cannot spend more than 15% totally from your hotel tax on the arts. You cannot spend more than 15% totally on historic restoration and preservation. Those are two overall caps. And then you have some special laws that apply to only Galveston, Port Aransas, I think Surfside, and maybe Quintanilla, that are eligible coastal municipalities. You're in a home rule city on the Gulf that has under 80,000 population. So that makes you an eligible coastal municipality, an ECM, okay? And as an eligible coastal municipality, you follow the rules that were technically intended for Galveston but apply to you as well. And it says that you have to spend at least 3 pennies on marketing. When I say 3 pennies, I'm talking about you have a 7% local hotel tax. So I consider each of those 7 percentage points a penny of the tax, okay? So 3 of those pennies must be spent on advertising. And that's a minimum. You can spend more, and many do spend more. In your case, I think 3.25% goes to the chamber. And that's considered your marketing function, okay? Your marketing and promotion. They get 3.25 pennies. Then you have other purposes. You have 3.25% that go to a special hotel tax fund. So if you add 3.25 and 3.25, that totals up to 6.5, right? And you have the remaining 0.5% in your budget goes to a facility fund. And that 0.5% is used for the convention center or the civic center and things like that. It's that facility fund. That generates, I think, around 1.1 million. The 3.25 generates, I think, 4.3 million each. One for the chamber, and the other is for your special tax fund. The special tax fund is what you have a lot of your special sort of needs, because under eligible coastal municipalities, you can spend up to 1, or a minimum you have to spend of 1 penny on things like your parks, your marina, your harbor, your convention center. It's basically tourism facilities. And there's even a catch-all and other improvements that directly promote tourism. So it's virtually every type of tourism facility. And you have a minimum of 1 penny that needs to be spent. But in the case of what you look at your actual budget, you're spending 3.25 on that. So that's like all of your tourism facilities, 3.25%, and then the marketing, 3.25%. That's 6.5, and you have a 0.5 cent left for the convention center facilities. All right. So where would arts and historical come in? They probably would come in under, you could be spending money on the marketing of arts and historical events. That could be part of the marketing function. You could also pay for certain events that they hold. And that could go under your special hotel tax fund, or arguably you could partner with the chamber on how that all coalesces, depending on how the limits or expectations of the chamber funding. Brett, do you spend any, is the arts at all administered under the chamber budget?
Yes, we promote the arts, but we also, some of these mini grants they got last year are directly coming through us as well. So yes, to both of those.
Okay, all right. So, and you might say, well, what about the beach? I mean, that's one of our biggest attractions here. Well, the state, Port Aransas, and we supported this legislation, was given authority to get back. The state has a 6% hotel tax. The city has a 7% hotel tax. So that 6%, 1/3 of it that is generated from that 6% comes back to the city to preserve the beaches, for beach cleaning, for coastal erosion, and for lifeguards and other sort of safety staff at your beaches. And the city uses all that 2% from the state to cover all those beach related costs. So you have the 2% from the state, and then we've already divided up the 7% for the city. The good news is that you have, when you look at the hotel tax of the chamber, they start out with about an $82,000 beginning balance. And then they get the 4.3 million from the city from that 3.25%. They use all the 4.3 million for operating, and at the end of the budget from last year's budget, they would end out still with having an $82,000 balance. For your special tax fund, you have some exciting opportunities there for long-term plans of What do you need to spend on? I know the mayor, I think you're looking at beautification along the routeway. I know that other folks have talked about marina, pier improvements, dredging, the harbor. That special hotel tax fund has 13.8 million last I checked. And of which you annually allocate an additional 4.3 million. And then it like from the last year's budget, it would have a $3.4 million negative operating flow because you're using some of the reserve, the beginning balance that you had. So and your end cumulative balance after the current budget year would be still around 10 million that's in that special tax fund. And you'll want to look at, because there's going to be a balancing, there's a pressure. You have wonderful museums and wonderful events and other entities that'll say, hey, what about our facilities? What about our programs and our events? And you got to balance that against what about the entire community assets that you have? And where do you put the money in terms of those priorities? Because you don't want to be just the money out for, you know, this year's program or this year's event. You also want to make sure you're investing in your entire community and the assets that everybody depends on in order to make it so it's a beautiful experience when people come here. That's basically the facility fund has that's the convention center fund has a beginning balance of 1.9 million. They do about 684,000 in new revenue. And at the end of the budget year, they anticipate having a $2 million budget, a $2 million end fund balance. So they have a little bit of extra money there. You have 10 million in your special tax fund, and you got 2 million in your convention center / facility fund. So that's kind of an outline of the monies, the way your 7% is allocated under the hotel tax, 3.25% to the chamber, 3.25% for special uses, 0.5% for the convention center and civic center. That's the two-part test we talked about. Every expenditure needs to directly promote tourism and hotel and convention activity and needs to fit into a category. In your city, it's a little bit easier for all your facilities to qualify because as an eligible coastal municipality, any facility that directly promotes tourism arguably qualifies. And so you have some breathing room there in terms of how to do it. Normally, from other cities that aren't eligible coastal municipalities, they're limited in using the hotel tax to either a visitor center or a convention center. And then they could spend on arts related programs and then historical restoration and preservation. You all have more flexibility in terms of the types of facilities and improvements that you can make. So let me open it up to questions that you all may have about use of local hotel tax. Yes.
Is there required spending? I think he said the special hotel fund has 13.4.
Yeah,
So
it started with 13 and then they spent about, on this year's budget, it'll end out with about a $10 million reserve.
you can just let that stack up.
You can, there's not, and for good reason. Let me give you a couple thoughts on that. You don't want to just spend everything just because you're worried that if you don't spend it, you won't deserve it the next budget cycle. You don't want to have a rush to spend it. If you want to look at what are our big long-term plans, what are our needs, and let's spend it where we get the most return on investment.
And that particular portion of the fund could be used for facilities.
It could be used for facilities.
You know, we aren't getting, like, right now we're building a new
Harbor
master building and refurbishing the facility there. If we wanted to expand on that, it could be used.
Right. The only thing you have to spend is you have to spend 3 pennies on marketing. That has to be
That's
done.
the only requirement.
And you have to spend a penny on some sort of physical facilities. That's a minimum.
Okay.
Okay.
And we hit both those.
And you hit both those. And then after that, you have the other pennies. You know, that's 4 pennies. You got 3 pennies left. You're allocating them all out on your current budget. But there's a difference between you allocate it and it goes to that purpose, that you still have some existing reserves from prior years. It may be allocated, but during the year, you may not spend it all. Or even your allocation will go to a category, but you may not write checks for that amount. And that's okay. You don't want to have it stock up, you know, you don't want to have it just sitting in a bank account and having no economic impact. If you have a use that you can dedicate it to, better to figure out what those uses are and start your planning and cash flow it out so you can do what you want to do. But on the other hand, you also don't want to just spend it to spend it.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier beautification, I think something Mayor Moore. Sorry.
You can call me Betty.
Is- Could we spend this money on beautification? Is that enough of an enhancement that they leave the community and say, we really enjoyed it, the streets were clean, there were trash cans on the piers that were dumped twice a day,
I don't think you could spend it for the garbage collection or the general maintenance of the streets. But I do think that you could probably spend it on, let's say South Padre did this, they spent it on that corridor in South Padre. That's where all their hotels and their tourism attractions are. They did the some medians and they did palm trees and improvements there. And I think arguably you could look at something like that under the catch-all phrase of and other improvements that would, you know, promote tourism. I don't think that's a huge stretch.
it sounds like there's such a surplus that even if there are fluctuations, this is probably Steve's expertise. It's not something you really budget for, like we expect a general amount of money. But it sounds like with the surplus, even if we had lower rental rates and lower revenues, we'd still be able to cover all the things we plan on covering.
Not really. Not when you have a $25 million marina sitting out there.
Okay,
So, yeah, that's
so we need.
a huge number.
We need to have a, what do you mean by $25 million?
Well, the 67-acre marina facility that we're proposing to build at some point, that has a massive price tag.
And so we need to. be able
So
to-
we don't have enough hot tax money.
But I thought that was supposed to be years down the road.
It could be whenever 4 of you say yes,
Well,
Wow.
and. even if
right?
it's- Even if you said yes today.
If you have the money.
It's not gonna be there for. We're not gonna start next week.
No, not next week, but I mean, if you start in 2 or 3 years, you need to start putting away now. You start in 5 years. I mean, you got to start, you know.
That's special funds.
Yes.
Support the other facility.
Yeah.
Like our harbor master
Yeah,
office.
correct.
I want to point out too, as the coastal community, you know, prone to storms and things, that reserve is especially important for us to weather the next storm.
Yeah, and not only to weather the storm, but after the storm, to be able to remarket and to maybe even rebuild some of your assets. So you want to kind of think about what is at risk with our, you know, with our climate and our weather occurrences and, you know, what would recovery look like? And what has recovery looked like in the past?
Darla, and obviously I remember, but not the numbers exactly, but going through what we went through after Harvey like that, I mean, there were so many unknowns about if we'd ever collect another hotel motel tax dollar. I mean, that was money, because we just set our budget and then Hurricane Harvey hit. So we obviously had to modify a lot of things, but I mean, that money was used, you know, parts of it were used just to get through what we need to get through to
I
fix
think
things.
the year before Harvey, we were sitting at about 6 million in hotel tax.
Mhm.
And the year that after Harvey, because we had so many STRs offline, we only hit about 4.8. Of course, now we've doubled, but we,
But we did do things like pass the marina bond
Right,
secured by those funds.
so we
So
could go ahead. and
because we
review-
couldn't wait for FEMA to step in
Right.
and repair the marina. We had to do that ourselves. So that was a lift that we used the hot tax
Yeah,
for. So
$6 million.
yeah, there's,
Mhm.
What happened to the balances during that time? I mean, we're sitting at 13 and 10 or 10 and 13.
they
What,
really didn't dip because we didn't do hotel motel special projects like here. We didn't do beautification, we worked on some rebuilding. And we were blessed with Harvey that, the state kicked in and paid 75% of our 10% match. Don't know that that would happen again, you know, FEMA paid 90%, the state paid 75%, so we only had to pay 25% of 10% to rebuild our hotel eligible projects, and they're still being built, I mean, we still have one pier that isn't reopened. We just finished 2 piers, nature preserve still, bulkhead still.
Yeah, we're still in recovery.
Yes, we're still in recovery, and some of that hotel motel special will be needed for match for those eligible things that are still being built.
We charge 7%, but that's not the max allowed by the.
It's the maximum for the general tenants. Now, what you could do is, let's say you had a special project that would qualify under what's called a venue tax. That's chapter 334 of the local government code. You could look at doing a venue project tax. That's a hotel tax of up to 2% for like a civic center or an expo center.
Facility that we voted on was gonna be paid.
Yes, the last time we voted for the recreation facility, that's exactly how it was gonna get funded,
And it didn't pass.
by 11 votes.
So.
That's another.
Yeah.
And was Hotel Motel gonna run the facility? I mean, keep it running?
For the operations?
Yeah, operation.
I mean, budget wise, it would be no different than the money we use now to operate the civic center or the marina, or, I mean, it's just another recreational hot tax funded facility, yeah.
We're gonna have, because
City
I know at one point that when we all looked at the very first recreation center, you know, the first.
Yeah, the very first version. The very first version was not a events venue.
Right.
It was strictly a, a city.
But we had the money to build it, but we didn't have the money to operate it month to month.
We didn't
At
have the
that
money to
time.
build.
No, we didn't have, we would have had to bond it.
Right, we were gonna go to the voters and we actually had already called a special election because it was right before Hurricane Harvey. And we pulled the special
But
election.
I'm
so we
talking
did
about the
not vote.
operations, I mean,
It was gonna be like a hybrid.
okay.
It depends on what your ballot proposition says. In some ballot propositions, they just build the facility. But then it's on the community to operate, to do the operations and maintenance.
Mhm.
In other bond propositions, it'll say to build it and operate and maintain it. So it would,
Forever, or
what?
can a bond say forever, or?
Well, they don't generally, they just say and for maintenance and operations, which would be argued. They don't say forever. But that would be the implication, and that's a very good question.
Continue to hold on.
Yeah, and you would just need to work on with your bond lawyer as to whether or not the M and O in their mind is permitted for that type of facility.
And that did come up at Goals Workshop this week. So when we met this week, to Scott's point, our goals workshop is basically goals. It's like, I liken it to like the Christmas wish list, right? Everybody brings in their ideas, everybody puts them on paper. And then the staff goes back and tries to figure out how and what we can fit into the budget once we know what our tax situation is going to be, right? And hotel motel tax is always an estimate, but we hope that it's going to be a good year, just like the next year, and sales tax will be a good year like the previous year. And then obviously our general fund comes out of property tax, but we created a list on Tuesday, and there are a lot of things on that list that are big, heavy lists that will require, a big chunk of those monies that are out there if we choose to do them and can get them in the budget. And probably dip into that $13 million balance, just because,
Yeah, and it gets hit, that balance gets hit really hard. I mean, just now we have the bulkheads being scoured, the entire 5,000 linear feet of bulkheads being scoured. We're going to probably have a change order of that project, close to $1 million to save it. And that's all coming out of that fund. So, I mean, that 13 million can disappear real fast.
The good news, though, is, and I love, the city manager is Mr. Practicality, and that's what you want. I always say you want to have a city manager and a finance director that are really, really negative. Because otherwise, the rest of us will spend all that money with abandon. We want someone who makes you feel really bad on the other side, saying, but think about this. And that's, you need that balance, and you'll be grateful in 10 years from now that you had it. The good news that I would note, and I got a lovely tour from Ashley Harris yesterday, showing me Cinnamon Shores North, Cinnamon Shores South. These are huge developments with high dollar rentals that are and they're just expanding exponentially. That if you tap in to make sure that all those are paying hotel tax, the revenue potential is just huge. So I think in your wish list, the first thing of order would be to make sure all those folks are registering to pay hotel tax.
Yeah, they are.
So you're with Cinnamon Shores? Okay, well, there you go. We love you. In a respectful, non-threatening way. So yes, it's an exciting, and they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful developments. And so there's gonna be a lot of new opportunities to invest in all the things that make Port Aransas special.
I have a question, Scott.
Uh-huh.
So the 6% that the state gets.
Yes.
2% we get back to keep the beach.
What happens to the rest of it?
What do you do with the rest of it?
Well, I am not the state.
I know.
I am the
But I
state
know you
hotels.
know.
I do know. The 6% rate, 11/12 of it all goes to state general revenue.
Oh,
Only 1/12 goes to promoting Texas as a destination.
we need more.
So, and that 6% rate, 1/2 of 1%. 0.05% basically goes to promoting Texas as a destination to out-of-state travelers, to people from around the world. It doesn't go to promote travel within Texas for people to come from Dallas to the coast, or from the coast to San Antonio or anything like that. It's only for folks from outside of Texas that come to Texas. That's their advertising mantra under state law, okay, to bring people into the state. Y'all are featured prominently in the state ads for tourism. Your beautiful beaches, your amenities, your different activities are always part of their campaigns. But you want to make sure that you keep front of mind, and that you work with the state tourism office of economic development and tourism. Tim Fennell heads that. The good news, though, is even though 11/12 of it all goes to state general revenue, and only 0.5%, that 1/12 portion goes to marketing, you do get 2 out of those 6 pennies from state general revenue back for your beaches. So
we meet the state law, but they don't meet their own law.
Hotel lobby has
they,
it pushed.
they make the state laws, so they meet every one of them. But the state laws they write for themselves are much more advantageous.
Right.
They have a lot more flexibility in their state law funding opportunities than the communities do.
Maybe they're using it to fix the roads for people to get down.
That certainly could be part of it, except roads, generally the state, maybe state highways, otherwise, counties and
Yeah.
cities are doing the roads. But yeah, it's, the good news is you get 1/3 of it back. You get 2 out of that 6 back for your beaches, which you didn't always get until a number of years ago. Well, one, they don't get it back. So, yeah, so they weep about the 2% they don't get. So the other cities, they get nothing from the state for tourism promotion, other than the promotion of Texas overall as a destination. You get 1/3 of the state hotel tax back. So, but in fairness, beaches are state property.
Yeah.
Yeah,
our beach is 8 miles and we have a multi-million-dollar maintenance regime, and
Yeah,
It's a lot cleaner than it was 30 years ago.
It is.
Oh, it's looking beautiful. It is looking beautiful, and you can't take that stuff for granted. You can't take any of the coastal climate and the pressures on, not only machinery, but natural assets. It's just, it's a lot to maintain. And so, you have to keep investing in it and retrofitting it, as you know, Mr. City Manager, better than anyone. What other questions do y'all have?
I just want to clarify the 15%, up to 15% for arts and up to 15% for historical and preservation.
Mhm.
That's of the entire.
Entire 7%, and that's not an entitlement, that's a maximum.
Right. Okay.
So most cities are not at the cap of 15%. Some cities are. Austin's at the cap. Houston has a little slightly larger cap for the arts. Most cities are nowhere near the 15%
And that's set by,
state law. Oh, what each city does?
no,
The 15%.
it's the 15%.
Yeah,
The
state law.
15% is part of 351 of the tax code. What you decide is how much up to the 15%. And you being advisory committee, ultimately the city council, by a majority vote, decides the final budget.
I have a question. So we have a lot of nonprofits in our town, a lot of events that happen that have been very successful.
Uh-huh.
And then when those events are successful, nonprofits are successful, they have turned around and given back to the community in the form of scholarships or different things for kids or different things like that. If we have an entity who's very successful, comes to us for hotel tax, and then they turn around and give scholarships.
How does that all work? Well, you have a right as a city council and city staff, or even as an advisory committee to say, we're gonna ask for you to submit your budget for your event. And we're gonna ask that you show what outside sources you have. Do you get grants? Do you, what other income do you have from your events? Do you sell t-shirts? Do you sell tickets? And we're gonna look at all that and decide, and then what do you use? How much of that do you reinvest in the event? And how much do you use of that to reserve back for future event costs? And if you're using it as a fundraiser to give money away, that's a beautiful thing. But you could establish a priority that we have a priority for funding entities that reinvest their revenues back into the organization and into future events. And we provide a priority for that. Or you could make it a rule that we only will fund entities that use the proceeds from the revenues from the event to back into funding future events, that have the same impact. You could have that rule, or that at least 50%, whatever you want, you could decide as a committee and as a city council and work with city staff to say, what does success look like for us? What do we want to do? Now, of course, politically, if you tell them, we want you to stop giving these scholarships, you're gonna have people are gonna complain that, oh my gosh, you're causing us to stop giving scholarships. But maybe what you could do is say, not address what they do in terms of that, but say, we require that you at least put at least X percentage of the revenues from the event back into investing in the sustainability and future events. So what you do with the rest of it, we're gonna require, let's say 50% to go back of the revenues.
But we also have the flexibility to say your event brings visitors to town. They stay in hotels, they spend money around here. We don't care what you do with the profit. We're gonna support you. We have that right. Correct?
You have that right.
We love scholarships.
Yeah. I think you can love scholarships, but still try to make sure events are sustainable. And so it's not, from a public policy standpoint, it's probably a very good idea to ask that they put back a certain amount, because you don't want to have it be an entitlement where every year we have to come back to you for that same amount every year. And some cities operate under, we're going to give you seed money. We're going to help you to develop the event and put on the event. And eventually the goal is for you to become self-supporting. That could be another philosophy that you could operate under. Some communities don't. But I would say at least a midway would be probably to suggest that a certain percentage should be reinvested in the event. Because otherwise it's all just a money out program. You keep spending money and putting the money out there, but if the organization is not sustaining itself or investing back in itself, then they're always going to be dependent, and you're going to have new needs and new organizations and all that. And eventually you'll feel like you're going to be disappointing a lot of organizations, by giving less and less each year and having them become more and more dependent.
Brett, I know you, for the CMB Chamber advertises for a lot of the organizations and events that happen throughout the year, because that's just what you do. Do you, or could you quantify that number? Or would you know what that is? I mean, and in your past history, I mean, I remember when I was in the chamber a long time ago, we would have events come to us and say, like Sandfest, many years ago, would say, can you give us some X amount of money to help us with our promoting our event? So for probably the 6 years I was on the chamber, we probably gave Sandfest anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 a year to help promote the event, you know, in addition to just promote it in general, but we gave them that and that went into their budget, right?
Yeah.
And so does that kind of thing still happen in some regard?
Yeah, so like we round up $5,500 this weekend, you know, from the Tourism Bureau to their event,
Okay,
Samfest, $10,000 outlay of cash or 12,000 outlay of cash plus 10,000 plus of direct advertising.
okay.
You know, so when you look at it all, with my line items, my budget real quick, you know, it's anywhere from 100 to 200,000 in those, in the events going back out into direct support.
It's coming out of that 3.25 basically already.
And that's money the organization then doesn't have to spend
Sure.
on the marketing, so they can spend on the operational cost.
Did you help spend some of the money that they got last year through you guys, or was it your money that was?
Oh, you mean the organizations?
That received money last
So,
year?
ACT, so we have an ad agency, right? We offered up our ad agency to these entities at no cost really for direct advertising by year. And ACT signed an agreement with us for, shoot, you guys are on the back, where was it, 20,000, 30,000? Of their 100,000 was pushed through direct advertising for their programs and events. The same happened for the art center, which is now happening actually, so we just started taking months ago on a program for the arts through our ad agency, using the funds you gave them, so that they can spend them on tourism advertising.
20 and 30,000.
I think, something like that, well, yes. And then nothing from that,
That was spent for marketing.
and then not holding agreements for us, okay. We still market all of them.
No, you market
Festival.
to bring people here. Yes, no, just the direct money that we give.
Money from the city last through the funnel back. Indirectly through us, yes.
I have a question. Who was your audience last night that you were talking to? Was it a different presentation or pretty much the same?
And they laughed, they cried, they screamed it was better than cats. I mean, everyone came up and hugged me at the end of the present. No, it was historical folks. Museum
was there.
folks, theater was there. It was we talked a little bit more about how do you measure your impact, your return on investment? How do you show impact? How do you document that? How do you evolve your events so that you turn a 1-day event into a 2-day event or a 3-day event? My big deal is people expect me to come from the hotel industry and play a game of gotcha. You have to do this and you can't do that, and these are the rules. And what they're surprised is that we come from a place of yes. We come from a place of how do we partner with you to turn a 1-day event that may be just a local event into a tourism event, an overnight activity? How do we help you to document and grow your impact? We want to have a long-term relationship. You know, when they hired me as CEO 23 years ago, they told me very clearly, Scott, we don't need your help in running our hotels. We know how to do that. We want your help in creating partnerships with cities and counties and the legislature and entities that use the local hotel tax to create win-win scenarios. So that's my job when I come here, and that's what was my job last night, was to say, I know y'all are nervous. You don't have a lot of staff. You don't have a lot of money. You want to apply for things. You have needs that are greater than your budget will allow. And you want to figure out how to qualify. So let's talk about what success looks like and what are all the tools that you can access to be successful in those realms. So that's what we focused on. Does that help?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. They videotaped it, I think. So yeah.
Attendance or
What?
what was the attendance?
What would you say, Brett? I'd say around 20 people, maybe?
20, 30, it was the 3 groups essentially, so you had forward from history probably, you had forward from theater, you had four or five from the arts. So if everybody there was almost directly affiliated, aside from Steve, who was there also, and myself, and then maybe would sort of appreciate the street. There.
The owner of the Tarpon Inn.
Department, yeah,
It was a lovely audience and everyone had a lovely time.
Much like this one.
Just like this one, equally lovely. What other questions do y'all have?
How do they do they have to prove, do they have to do something written? So we're looking where it's a math equation that we're responsible as opposed to just putting out the hotel tax and we don't worry about it? Or what should
That's a great
they
question.
look for? And what should council look for,
Mhm.
so that everybody's on the same page and we're not
Right.
arguing about math?
Yeah,
Because if we're gonna give something somewhere, more than likely, we're taking it away from
Right.
somewhere.
that's such a good question. Next question.
So good, you don't want to answer.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question. And let me tell you what I shared with them last night, because they were asking the same question. Is, to me, it's in the interest of the municipality to say, here are the ways that we want you to try to measure your impact. And instead of everybody trying to recreate the wheel, here are things that we would suggest or we would consider meaningful. One could be surveys of their audience. In other words, they could say, here's our event. We had 1,100 people come to it. We're going to use this methodology. And instead of having everybody figure out how to do a survey, why not have the city work with the chamber and talk to maybe one of your university business departments or statistics departments and come up with a methodology that makes sense, that you can say, here are the 4 steps that do an effective survey. How many people at a minimum of your audience you need to survey, how to do it efficiently so that they'll answer the questions, and what are the types of questions that you need to ask. To give you an example, I was talking to Ashley last night about, they have a technological sort of survey that they do when guests come in. They fill it, use a little iPad, and they put down their name, they put down, their full name, their address. They put down, whether or not they're staying in a lodging facility, and I think they may have one other question. And I said, why don't you just limit that to zip code? You don't need their address. And I said, and you don't need their name, because a lot of people don't want to give up their name. Ask zip code and ask if they're at an area lodging facility, and you're done. Because you can use economic formulas for, if you come to the coast and the average stay is, let's say, 3 days or whatever it is, and the average spend is X amount, and you have all those formulas that are for each part of the state, just by knowing their zip code of where they're coming, they're a tourist, and knowing that they're staying at an area lodging as opposed to their own vacation home, that they are paying hotel tax. And so you can calculate their spend, their average stay, their impact, and what percentage of all your visitors fit in that category of tourists. And so just 2 questions, zip code and if they're staying in an area lodging, and you don't even need to know which one, it doesn't matter. Because people are private about it. So we talked about surveys. We talked about getting the essential information like that, and then extrapolating from there what the impact is. But there are other things too, where, like in Dallas, we work with community organizations where we said, if you get this many visitors, we can credit you this much that we can assume are in area hotels. That would be different for here, where there's a much larger percentage of folks who are staying at STRs and maybe in Dallas. So you could work with someone to come up with a strategy. If you have 1,000 people, we're going to automatically credit you X number of them are likely STR guests. And then we can use that for your various numbers. Third, I suggest on every where they have facilities, like every museum, they have not only a guest log, but they have a box that people check that says, are you staying in an area lodging facility? So if you don't have the technological, you're just gonna ask 2 questions. Always at least add that box onto there. Measure room blocks, ask people that if you're gonna have an event, like at your civic center, what I suggest that folks do is have one rate if they're doing an event. But then have a discount for that event if they have a room block. And then, and then to get that discount, they have to submit what the room block is and how many rooms they actually picked up. That way, do they have an intent to have an impact on hotel activity or lodging activity? And it's a way to automatically for your civic center to quantify what percentage are getting that discount because they have a room block, what percentage are not. There may be other ways for them to show a hotel impact. But I guess what I'm saying, Councilmember Christensen, is I would suggest that you work as a community to help provide tools that everybody can use the same set of tools to look at how to do a survey, how to ask for information from the guests, how to automatically quantify for large events, what the arguable impact is. I'm a big believer in, we have a sample form that we can share with your staff that is an application for funds. And then what's even more important is we have a post-event form. And so on the application for funds, you may say how much you're going to spend on marketing your event. The post-event form, and this is what communities do a good job of putting an application. They do a horrible job of their post-event stuff. Because what they say is on the application, we have all these questions. Post-event is tell us how you were successful. There's no set format, and so a community, you may, what we suggest is on your application, you say, how much did you spend on marketing? The post-event form should say, how much did you actually spend? You said in the application, you were gonna spend 20,000. How much did you actually spend? You said you were gonna have 500 visitors. How many actually visited? You said you were gonna have a room block of 100 rooms. How many did you actually pick up? Apples to apples. And that way everybody's competing with the same criteria. And the way to look at this, what I would suggest as a council or as a committee, is the first thing, if you were running a business, and arguably you have a fiduciary duty to use this hotel tax in a way that you would your own money if you were running your own business, you would say, what sustains my business? What's our biggest client? How do we keep them and how do we grow that business? So create your foundation for hotel tax. What fills up the most rooms? How important. And how do you figure that out? Have a couple of your hotel operators and your condominium operators, our friend from Cinnamon Shores, what fills up your facilities, your rentals? What's your top? What percentage? Make sure you're investing in that. Don't assume that. I gave the example last night of South Padre Island, that one year I was out there and the council and the mayor told me, Scott, we're going to stop advertising for spring break. And I said, why is that? And they said, because we're full. We're always full spring break. It's throwing good money after bad to advertise when we're going to be full anyway. And I said, but you're assuming the sale. You got to realize people, if you don't keep South Padre Island top of mind, they're going to pick another loyalty. They're going to have another experience. Well, they didn't take my advice and they didn't sell out that year. And since that year, they have not completely sold out spring break. People found other loyalties. You can't assume that sale, then it'll continue. So again, as you're looking at your tourism plan, you want to look at, what is your biggest pieces of business, then what's next on the totem pole or on the pyramid, and then keep going up. And you want to invest based on how important it is. If you're only generating 5 room nights or the limited visitors to your facility or your event or your organizational offering, it's not that you shouldn't qualify hotel tax, but it should be a lot less than an entity that maybe generates 100, which should be less than an entity that generates 1,000. And by investing and saying everybody has an opportunity, but we're going to do it in a way that returns, we have a duty to make sure that we maximize these funds because we want to continue to rebuild our piers and our harbor and our, beautification and all that. To do that, we have to be investing in things that'll regenerate that money. Yes, Brett?
So I know you have a flight catch at some point, so I'm gonna keep this.
Okay.
We gotta go. But, I know the answer to like infrastructure, like in terms of boardwalks, and parking lot, the eligible expenses there. But What about when you go out a little further, what's your opinion on, cell service and broadband connectivity that is faltering and can't support the needs of our visitors and for residents?
Oh, that's interesting. That would be a bit of a gray area. I would argue that would fall under the prohibition against general infrastructure. You could look, there's that provision, wording in the statute, I think it's other improvements that promote tourism. But when I think they think of improvements, they're thinking of physical facility improvements. You could maybe make the argument that would be cell towers. On promoting that, you can make that argument. But that would be a bit of a gray area. I'd want to work with your city attorney and see if we could come to some sort of consensus.
Yeah, we just did some studies, we know what's out there, we know how bad we are. We just gotta figure out.
But yeah.
Just to tag team on what Scott just said. So the application process, the follow-up. So Lawrence has been working on a draft. He's looked at a whole bunch of different cities. He's looked at all the information coming from Scott's group. So that's what you guys will be doing this fall, and we'll kick that off. And your first, probably 5 months is going to be developing that application process. What is it that it's going to look like? Of course, that does come back to council for approval. So you guys will jointly be working on it. You guys will be fleshing out the meat of it. And so eventually our goal would be by like April to have the process finalized so that an entity can come to the board, get the application, get it filled out, meet back with the board in time for the June budget workshop. So we'll have a timeline of when you can do an application process. And then of course, the follow-up meetings to see how they did, grade them so that next year when they come back, you guys can say, well, you did this great, you didn't do this great, but that process is what you guys will be working on. That's going to be your main,
Yeah, so it's probably a good segue for me to speak up.
But we don't go full blown into it because we got to get Scott out of here.
Get him out of here, for the love of God.
I got 4 questions for you real quick. Okay. I'll make it real quick. Should self-sustaining or self-supported essentially look like less money granted per that applicant a year, most likely, or not necessarily?
Well, it depends on your plans. Some cities say, you know what, we're going to continue to invest in these organizations because it may not be possible for them to ever be fully self-sustaining. They're always going to have to fundraise. They're always going to have to develop. And so our goal is to give them what funding is reasonable based on the return. Other communities say, no, we're going to try to give you a little bit less each year. And the theory being, we want you to become self-sustaining and we're going to have a period of time. It's just a philosophy. And I don't know that there's a right answer. You need to decide. There's also some theories in some communities where they have core institutional attractions that they want to make sure are here, certain events that we're always going to invest in, the sand festival, we're always going to invest in this fishing tournament, or these are this big of an event and we need to support it so that they can grow. And so it just, you need to decide, what are your core events? Is there an opportunity for them to be sustainable? That wouldn't be a bad thing to use a little bit of the hotel tax to come up with sort of an analysis, if you will, on which of these events could we use and try to, help them to become self-sustaining. How can we help them to document and grow their impact?
Sure. All right, next one. If not monies or expense through the chamber for external applicants, should that same group be allowed to, in a sense, double tap for more hot monies with another request through the city directly? Your thoughts on that?
That's a matter of rules. I think it's better to have one application, one grant, because even though theoretically you could have a system where you're allocating it separately, it always creates some friction in the public of, look, they already got money from here. Why are they applying over there? If I were you, I would probably suggest you create one system for applying for the funds
Okay.
and do it that way.
Sounds like when we adopt the policy here, that'll probably be the policy and to figure something else out. Next question, should the city council allocate a set amount to end the adopted budget for these external applicants, via the, you know, whether it be arts, preservation, advertising, should there be a set amount adopted? For allocation of those, like whenever people apply externally.
You mean like setting a bucket of 100,000, that's the max.
For-
agreed to
For nonprofits or for different events.
Any external applicant that's coming to, let's call it the audit advisory board. Should
That-
there be a set amount for that board?
You know, it probably would be smart enough, and this is my reason. If you don't have a set amount, there's gonna be an unlimited number of requests and people may just say, gosh, we're gonna pay for our entire building, or we're gonna ask for our entire budget. And then you're gonna, you know, there's not a concept of the size of what is available and the history of how much of that's gone to other periodic needs. And so, but the big picture is, what are your other goals, like the wish list the council was talking about? Again, I would look at some sort of comprehensive plan that includes tourism as one of those elements, and make sure that you're consistent with your comprehensive plan, that you're looking at your current wish list. What are the smartest uses? Because otherwise you can be penny and nickeled over all these other requests, and better to have everybody involve the community, and let's all have a shared set of values. We all want a marina, we all want a harbor, we all want to have a rebuilding fund, and a reserve fund of at a certain level in case we have another hurricane. What are the core elements of success for us? And for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and then try to stick to that plan and evolve that over time and modify that. And you won't have all the answers, but there are people who can come forward and interview and talk and look at other coastal communities and look at how they've succeeded. You don't have to recreate the wheel. Like when you're developing an application, the beauty is there's lots of great applications that you can start with, and you can make yours even more personal and more responsive. The most important thing is that you probably also work with the community organizations to say, here's what we're looking at as a draft application. Would this be workable for you? Is it in plain English? Are we asking for too much? They have limited time, limited staff, limited proceeds. You want to make it simple and reasonable.
All right, last question. I think it's much all the answers. Great. Is there a recommended cap amount for external applicants? If they're in, what do you see cities do for if there is a cap amount for external applicants?
I don't think there's a good answer to that, and I'll tell you why. Because in some communities, you have a lot more that go to external applicants because they don't have a convention center, or they don't have a lot of tourism facilities. And then there may be a bedroom community, or to give you an example, like an oil community, where they have lots of hotel activity, but they don't have a lot of tourism eligible facilities. And so in that situation, that's different than a coastal community that maybe 80% of your economy is all related to tourism. And so your situation is going to be different than what we do in Dallas, which is different than what we do in San Antonio. So I wouldn't say the best practice is to personalize it to what works for you. And I would, again, do your foundation, your pyramid of what's creating and maintaining your business, what's growing your business. You know, what do you want to make sure you do that is most impactful? And then I would look at the overall third-party elements, and if there's a way to quantify what percentage of this ecosystem are they, and then accord them that percentage of the funds. And say that, these other assets create and sustain this percentage of what we're doing. And we're going to reinvest in those. And some of those maybe, as my friend, the city manager, and we've worked together for many, many years, very unhappily, I might know.
On your part?
I say yes, he says no. But that's the nature of the business. Is looking at what are your long-term needs, and some of these are expensive. And sometimes, a certain facility is like you were saying, I forget the expression, some technical item was $1 million, you were saying, the bulkhead, yeah. So, I mean, people aren't probably going to visit the bulkhead. Oh,
Yeah, it's a huge fishing.
Oh, I stand corrected. Stand corrected. My nephew called me just this week and said, Uncle Scott, when I come to Austin, can you take me fishing? Do I look like someone who takes people fishing?
But you know.
Well, I said, I don't, your uncle does not know a lot about fishing, but I said, we will make it happen.
Does anyone have any other questions? I'm sure there are lots of questions and we could probably stay here for a long time, but if someone has some, we can address them now, maybe, or make a list and we can, Scott's a great resource.
We're
And-
gonna meet in 3 months.
Yeah, we're gonna get past the summer. I know everyone's busy, but we're gonna try to we have one more person to appoint and the alternate, right? So we're gonna try to get that done here in the next couple months and then set a meeting for mid-September. We'll shoot out sometimes to the board members and
The only thing I'd like to add about the application is having served on something where you award grants, we've had people come to us and ask for the moon, and we've supported the cause, but we couldn't like everything. And in some cases, we have to have some flexibility or communication to say, we can fund it up to this percentage, but if that's all we can give you, are you still gonna be able to do this? You know, we wouldn't want to allot those funds if they wouldn't participate. If they couldn't make up the difference.
Well, and that brings to mind, do you want to do things as a reimbursement? Do you want to qualify that the amount you're going to give them will be dependent on them having the impact they indicated, or you proportionally reduce it? If they said they were going to have 1,000 visitors, but they only had 200, is there a different allocation that goes for 200 than would have gone for 1,000? Do you want to hold them accountable for what they're committing to? And I would argue that's probably a good policy, so it matters what they commit to. And so there are different ways. You're asking all the right questions, and
Maybe that application needs to clarify that you are gonna be required to report back to us.
yeah,
so-
that's definitely gonna be a part of it.
And
Yeah.
some communities provide 50% upfront.
Yeah.
but the
That's one thing
remaining
we're looking at
50%,
is
yeah,
where you don't
50%.
get everything up front.
Right.
You get,
right.
you have to come back and prove up in your follow-up report
Right.
to get the other half. So that's another way you can do it.
Yeah, and that's I think is a smart way to do it. And you might want to have a provision too where, well, maybe not. I'll leave. Never mind. I'll just-
Text me that one.
I'll text you. Speaking of that, let me give you my cell phone number so that if you have questions afterwards, it's 512-565-5292.
I don't have that.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You called me on it. I will tell you the two things that I want three things. Yeah, Scott Joslove, Joslove. The three things that you've done incredibly well, and I just want to commend you in Port Aransas. One, you have one of the best chamber execs in the country. That's what makes the difference in being able to promote. I mean, honestly. And yeah, who's taking me back to the airport? Second, I've worked with your city manager for years and years, and he knows what he's doing. And third, you have one of the nicest, I mean, I love working with your mayor and your council. You've elected the right people to lead your effort. And I promise you, I'm not paid enough to say those things unless I mean them. And I mean them with all my heart. So you guys are in a wonderful stead. You have natural assets. You have a great responsive city council that's going to look at things long-term. You have a city manager who's going to keep us all honest, and a creative chamber exec who's going to say, let's be transformative. So this is you're in an exciting opportunity. And I've done this for over 30 years. So call my cell phone and say, Scott, is this crazy? Is this allowed? What if we did this? Why not that? I'm always available to help. So, and I look forward to partnering. We are your partner.
You've been a partner for a long time, so thank you
Yeah.
very much for.
Thank you, sir. All right.
It's my honor, my great pleasure. So
Where'd you stay last night?
I stayed at the
Francis Pass.
yeah, Brent's.
Yeah.
And Brent's accommodations were less than satisfactory.
I thought during COVID.
Yeah, I stayed at the Princess,
Francis.
Francis Princess, and it was beautiful. But I'm an equal opportunity. I'm happy at a La Quinta, I'm happy at a Best Western, I'm happy at a condo, whatever it may be. I'm just proud to be there. So it was lovely. All right,
Thank you, sir.
call me if I can help.
Okay, any other items for future consideration?